Okay, guys, so today you and I are going to talk about interview answers. So let's get into it. So I figured that I was going to make a small presentation about the common denominators and the differences between how juniors and senior developers usually behave when you ask them very common questions as part of an interviewing process. So let's dive right in. First question is a favorite of mine. What is the best part of software development? Now, this is a very common question I like to ask myself as well, and I've been asked multiple times in different interviewing stages this specific question. And you should probably expect that if you're serious about becoming a software developer, you're going to get this question at some point. Now, what usually happens when you're dealing with a junior developer is that they will say something like, I love building things, or I love solving problems, I like to learn new things, etc., etc. It's a very common thing that a junior developer speaks from a place of passion, if that makes sense. You're most of the time going to see that sort of thing also pay off very well. The juniors who don't do so well are usually not coming from a place of interest or personal drive. And I think this is it's extremely important to highlight this for junior developers, because you have to think about your position within the company if you should get if you get this job. And basically what I'm saying here is that if you get the job, the person who's hiring you, the employer, what they want to see is that you're going to be a very quick return on investment. You see, you don't really have a lot of junior developers who have any skill, in real skill. We're not because that's the whole point, right? You're getting your first or maybe second job or something like that, and you're not really in a position where you learn the ropes just yet. So showing passion in this scenario is usually the way to go, because that is the thing that gets people excited about hiring you, because they know that, wow, this person really cares about this stuff, and it's probably going to be you're probably going to be a good energy to keep around the office, right? And it's very likely that you're going to show a lot of interest, right? So for senior developers, it's actually funny because it's very similar. So senior developers usually say that, well, I love building things, and like they enjoy fixing issues and solving problems. And the another one that is also very common is that they say that they really enjoy working with other developers who are really good, or like to collaborate with people. And notice here that the answers are very similar to junior developers, and I think that that is honestly, I think that this is because this is a very attitude oriented question. It's not a question that is trying necessarily to figure out your seniority levels or like how good you are at software development. It's just we're just trying to figure out here what is the outlook of the candidate's outlook on their profession. What is it that they actually enjoy about the whole process? And so just as a lesson to take away from this part of the whole of this sort of question is that if I'm asking you about your outlook, you need to communicate, and you should communicate, that you actually enjoy that what you do, because this is a big part of the hiring process. If you are not a good communicator, or you don't communicate clearly that you actually enjoy your job, even if you're not having a good day or so forth, it's not gonna work for you. Ideally, you want to showcase things like these sorts of answers where you actually clearly show that software development is something that you truly enjoy. Let's move on. What is the hardest part of software development? Now, this, on the other hand, is more of an experience question. So here, usually what juniors will do is that they will answer something fairly trivial. I'm not saying that, don't read too much in when I say trivial. It's just from the perspective of most employers, they're going to expect you to give a very simple answer, such as, oh, I think CSS is hard, I think JavaScript is hard, it is hard to know when to write tests, it's hard to write good tests. These sorts of things are fairly, we call them trivial because they showcase that you've never actually faced any of the more complicated problems within software development. This is where the experience comes in. these are not bad answers for a junior developer, but they are very sure ways of telling that you are a junior developer because you've never faced a problem that is hard. Like, let's just pretend now, if you've never faced a problem that stands out more to you than that CSS is hard, and then it's very likely that you haven't dealt with the more complicated aspects of software development. So here is where a senior is most likely going to give you a much more elaborate and inclusive or holistic answer, and this is because of experience usually. So they will say things like, it's hard to get an accurate specification, because it is really hard to get an accurate specification. Almost all the time you have this back and forth where, alright, so your stakeholders said one thing and now you need to build something, but it turns out that that's not exactly what they wanted, so forth. Scope creep causes a lot of frustration for me, which is also a very common answer to this. People disturbing me when I work as a senior. There's quite a lot of senior developers who since they are independent and they kind of know what they're doing. They get frustrated when people get in their way. It's hard to maintain quality and meet deadlines at the same time, which is also a fairly common one. It's actually one of the most common reasons, and we're going to touch on that later on, as to why people actually move from one company to another when they're a senior. Getting buy-in to fix long-running issues is always hard. There's usually no leadership. Like, all of these sorts of answers are very common to hear from somebody who has been around the block for a little while. They know that once you've settled into, as you can notice about these answers, nothing here indicates all that much that, oh, I have a problem with a specific piece of technology or something like that, because a senior person is usually past that point. Like, the tech is usually fairly straightforward at this point. They kind of know the tools and they feel comfortable in their own skills. And now all of these sorts of social problems and these, I've said that a few times before, that at some point soft skills is going to be the thing that stops you. Because you get to a point where you just realize that, well, I can almost always solve this problem if I just have the resources and the time to do it. It's not an issue technology wise, but it's a big issue to get people on board with the idea. That's usually the sort of answers you will get from a truly senior developer. So what interests you in software development? Now, this is also an outlook type of thing, which is it's actually funny because the juniors and the seniors are very similar here as well. So quite a lot of junior developers will answer something like, I don't know, React, Angular, Vue, Docker, test-driven development, game development, functional programming, etc., etc. Like, they have these different areas where they are genuinely interested in. I usually like to say that there's two types of junior developers that are, at least what I've dealt with in the past, and one of them are the toolsmiths. Like, these are the people the juniors who are really into a specific framework, or they're really into some type of tech stack or tooling or stuff like that. And then you have the process and practices type of people who are much more into something like, very commonly, test-driven development and mob coding and stuff like that. They're more about practices than specific tools. And there's nothing really better or worse with whichever you are. It's more about, once again, this is an outlook type of question, where the important part here is just to show the fire in your eyes, show that you actually care about this sort of stuff, but don't go crazy about it, because it can work against you as well if you come off as being too opinionated. So for the seniors, they also have similar sort of thing. Usually, like, I have talked to many senior developers who want to try something different, and a lot of seniors are interested in like different front-end frameworks and DevOps, cryptocurrencies, cybersecurity, user experience, and so forth. So there's not really that much of a difference between the senior developers and the junior developers. There are many similarities. Honestly, though, this is just my personal experience, and it might not be correct, I see a tendency, though, within the seniors that they usually are more about certain tools. Like, they're interested in trying out something different. They're not as passionate about test-driven development necessarily. But there are quite a lot of seniors who are that way as well. But they're much more likely to answer things like DevOps or so forth because they want to try a different workflow. Usually, I find that it's because they have been working in a certain way at their previous companies where they've noticed in the industry that, oh, there's all these new cool things that are going on that I don't really get to work with, so I want to do something different. I want to try something else. And that's a very common viewpoint of the senior developers. So what would you say are your strengths? And this is also a pretty common question that you get, like, what are you good at? And for juniors, it's usually always going to, and this, in my opinion, is because this is an experience question. Usually a junior will answer things like, I'm a fast learner, I work really hard, or that they really like programming. And there is a lot of emphasis on the potential of the junior. The junior is usually trying to justify, and this is very accurate in many ways, that they're going to be a good investment, because that is, as I said earlier, one of the most important things that you can communicate as a junior developer. The difference between you getting the job and not getting the job is usually determined by one part how good of a culture fit you are, of course, and like if they actually like you, but and some tech skills and so forth, but primarily if they will believe that you will be a very fast learner or a very good investment, then they will get a quick return on investment. So senior developers have similar sorts of answers in some cases. They will also say things like, oh, I'm a pretty fast learner, and then you have more experience related answers such as, I'm pretty good at talking with people, I know my area, I deal with things as they come, kind of roll with the punches type of thing, and I'm good at solving issues. So at least from my experience, junior devs try to prove that they work really hard, and they try to prove that they are a worthwhile investment. And seniors are a little bit more laid back, I would say, in some cases, and it comes back to experience. They're not so much about proving themselves because they already have the seniority, but they're more about saying that they are good co-workers and hard workers and so forth. That's, at least from my perspective, what usually the way it goes. So more focus on like being a good co-worker and being good at communication and so forth from the seniors, and more focus on proving that you're a worthwhile investment as a junior. So this is also on, what would you say are your weaknesses? And this is a pretty good question. So the juniors will usually speak from a point of self-consciousness and insecurity. So very common answers to this is like, I feel I often take too long, sometimes I get stuck and I need help, I don't know all the tools, I'm often nervous, I don't know how long things will take. And this is the experience that comes back here, where the junior's weakness is usually just that they just don't know enough to be able to accurately estimate work, or that they are insecure and they feel a little bit timid around the more experienced developers, or in an environment where they have, well, it's live, like they've been through school, or they've been self-taught or something like that, and it's been all fun and games kinda, and now when they're in an environment where people actually are gonna put expectations on them, it's a bit intimidating. So for the seniors, they usually say things like, I can get annoyed when there are too many meetings. That's one of the most common ones. Like usually you see this in more introverted senior developers who are a little bit like, I'm not saying lone wolves, but they kind of don't like to do their thing. And it's super common. I can comment a lot on pull requests. That's another one where like a lot of opinionated seniors, like there's quite a few seniors. Juniors don't really do this as much because, in my experience at the very least, juniors are way too self-conscious about themselves in many cases to give comments as much as like more experienced developers. It's not all, I mean, they're going to get to that point, but usually they have to get over the hump of feeling comfortable first. And another common one is, I can sometimes be opinionated, I like to work by myself, I need clear instructions on what to do. That's also one. I work with many developers who have they're not creative types per se. They're very good problem solvers, but they do actually need quite a of a bit of direction in order to get things done and need to be allocated tasks and so forth. There is a saying that you can be a rock star or you can be a superstar, and a rock star is the sort of person who is more of a grinder, where they will just, you give them a bunch of stuff to do and they will just do it and they will fix it and they will be great. The superstars are more creative types, where they're more about thinking about improvements and innovation and things like that. So you have both types. Right. What would you have liked to change about your last job? This is also a very good one, and it's you will get asked a flavor of this one. There's multiple ways of getting asked this question, but it's a pretty good question. So junior developers will usually say things like, "We never did any pair programming. There were no tests. Everything was always a hack. We never had any time to do things well. We worked with old tools and we had legacy code." This is pretty normal, like all of this stuff, and it comes down to usually that the juniors are unhappy with that. They know that there are certain so-called best practices within the industry that other companies are dealing with and like they're kind of using, and they're not allowed to do that, or that there's a sensation that their product is sub-quality, or that the way that they do work is subpar. This is probably the most common pattern, at least that I see in juniors giving an answer to interview questions. And finally, the seniors, they will say things like, "We never get any time to fix tech debt. We had to cut too many corners. Management expected the engineers to fix everything, and no time for personal development or improvements." And what I think is interesting about this is that it's not all that unfamiliar. Like, I mean, it's very similar to me. Like, these answers are usually, like, between seniors and juniors, the reason why people are unhappy are usually very, very much the same. I mean, a junior will often have more emphasis on that we do things the wrong way, whereas a senior is usually more concerned with management mismanaging their time, or they lose patience or so forth. Like, bad leadership is usually a really big thing for senior developers in many cases, whereas juniors, I suppose, in a way has the same sort of issues. They just focus on different aspects of the same fundamental thing. So the red thread, at least for me, is that developers overall who switch jobs from one job to another, usually that switch, that unhappiness, comes from like, if a product's quality drops too low. I like to think about it as as a very good argument to any company to maintain product quality. Like, it's not just about your customers, it's actually about the happiness of your developers. Because if you cut too many corners and quality dives too much, you're actually going to mentally start impacting the people who are working on that project, and that is a really bad situation. Like, it's a dark hole that you can't really get out of. We call it the broken window principle. If a building has one broken window, then you're going to have 2 windows, and then 4 windows, and then 8 windows, and all of a sudden everybody feels like this is a shitty building and you have to knock the whole thing down because you let it go to a point where the decay started to get into people's heads. So the lesson that I think that we should take away from these sorts of answers, these sorts of answers between juniors and seniors, is that if you want seniors or juniors, any developer really, to stay in your company, you need to have a balance between delivery speed and product quality, because you simply can't afford to get into a space where the developer feels like they're working on a really, really bad project and they're just frustrated all the time, because then most of them will actually leave. So what I want you to take away from all of this is basically that I hope that I could showcase a little bit of the differences between developers, like how they usually answer a few common interview questions, and that when it comes to Outlook type of questions, where like just questions about how people feel about their profession. The juniors and the seniors are in many cases very similar to each other. The only time you really see a difference in answers to interview questions between seniors and juniors are when you're dealing with classical experience types of things, where you can very clearly see, as an example, as we saw earlier, what are the problems that with software development. Well, if you haven't really done all that much within your time in IT, where maybe you've just worked for a few months, or maybe it's your first job, well, then you're going to be more focused on these simple tech type of things like the basics, whereas a senior developer will usually give answers that are more related to process and leadership and so forth. So overall, I think that the interesting part here is that the attitude between seniors and juniors who care about what they do is pretty much the same. They're enthusiastic and they like to try new things. And when it comes to the bad stuff, they're also pretty much aligned. Like the juniors and seniors are outlook-wise very similar, and the main difference is actually just that one has been working longer than the other, so they know more about the industry. Have a great day.